Okay, everyone, good afternoon, everyone. It is September 16th, 2020, and my name is Cristina da Silva. I am the Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs Officer for the City of Dallas. I am so excited for this conversation that we will be having today. Not only are we celebrating Welcoming Week, where we welcome our immigrant and refugee communities that we have here in Dallas, we're also celebrating Latinx Heritage Month. And I just want to share, to commemorate this discussion and celebration, I'm proudly wearing my traditional Shakira necklace, which is from my native country, Panama. As a proud immigrant, I'm really looking forward to this discussion where we'll be going over published research and analysis of what it means to be a welcoming city that connects immigrants and long-term residents to shared prosperity. I will let you all know that this is a recorded presentation that will also be posted and shared on the City of Dallas social media platforms. Today, we have a great panel of speakers, and I will all invite them to introduce themselves. First, I want to start with my fearless leader and jefa, Chief Liz Cedillo Pereira.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Great. So just wanted to say hello, everybody, and thank you for joining in this conversation today. I am going to be brief because I'm interested in hearing what the LBJ School has to say about how we rate in comparison to other large cities as far as how we're doing with our immigrant inclusion and integration efforts. So thank you for joining us. As Christina said, during Welcoming Week, we hope that you are getting to take advantage of some of these events. And if you don't know, there's other events going on. In fact, today I will be attending Zumba this evening in collaboration with our partners at Refugee Services of Texas. So with that, I will pass the mic off to Professor Wasem, who will introduce our research team and herself.
Hello, I'm Ruth Lawson. I'm a professor of policy practice at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And it has been such an honor over this past year to work with Liz and her colleagues in the City of Dallas Equity Office and Office of Immigrant Affairs and Welcoming Communities. And it's a delight to be part of Welcoming Communities Week as Dallas celebrates immigration and refugees. So I am going to be talking shortly, but I would like to turn it over to my students who did all the work to introduce themselves before we dive into the actual research project.
So good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be with you all. My name is Claudia Sandoval, and I'm one of the students who helped with the research last year and am getting my master's in public affairs.
Hi, I'm Ana Perez. I'm also a master's student at the LBJ School studying public affairs. And thank you to the Office of Welcoming Communities and the City of Dallas for hosting this event.
And hello, my name is Adonis Cajeda. I am also a master's student at the LBJ School and am also pursuing a social work degree at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work.
Okay, I am going to begin to just highlight the research by sharing a screen, and we'll see how that goes, and do a brief presentation of what we did over this past year for the City of Dallas Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs. And we are part of the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And there was a group of 16 students who worked with me on this project. Here they are in a photograph, but I'll give you a sense of what the purpose of the project was. Foremost, the LBJ School has as a major element of its graduate program that students engage in a 9-month policy research project where they work with on a real policy issue with real government officials or nonprofit agencies in order to do a relevant policy research. So we were particularly fortunate to be able to work with the city of Dallas on this project. Now, our goals and objectives were rather ambitious when we began. We wanted our policy analysis and methods to measure immigrants' attitudes about their life in Dallas. We wanted to find some way to delineate access to service and other services and other resources in the city of Dallas, and also to see how Dallas scores nationwide on measures of immigrant integration. So that was the objectives of our project, and the methods we used was a three-tier approach. And that's what I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining why we took this approach. We began by looking at the national context, and we based this analysis on the cities index that the New American Economy had developed. And those of you who work at Immigrant Incorporation know the work of the New American Economy, and they're a great partner to have. And so we started with the data that they had already collected of 100 cities, one of which was Dallas. But then we identified through statistical methods I won't describe to you unless someone wants to talk offline about it, to find the cities that were most like Dallas in order to refine the comparisons going forward. And here's what we found. 3 areas that were particularly of concern that we wanted to share with the city. One was, how did Dallas do in job opportunities? And you can see, and I won't let you struggle with finding Dallas, it's third from the bottom in terms of job opportunities for immigrants. So that's an important thing we wanted to bring to the city's attention. And again, these are cities that are comparable to Dallas on economic and social measures that we think are essential to Immigrant Incorporation. Another thing that was quite important is civic participation. We know this is important to the city of Dallas. It's important nationwide. And again, Dallas didn't do so well. It scored, it tied at the bottom of the heap with 4 other cities, Fort Worth, Irving, and Phoenix. So civic participation is an area that we wanted to draw the city's attention to. And finally, the question of livability. What's it like for immigrants living in Dallas? And here again, Dallas is at the bottom of the comparable cities. So these are important. There were other measures where Dallas did quite well, particularly government involvement. And so I don't want to, make Dallas look too bad. I just wanted to point out the areas for potential and for further opportunity in order to focus our discussion today. Now, the next thing we did after looking at how Dallas compared nationwide to other cities, we took a look at the neighborhoods. And in this, we did socioeconomic analysis using data from the American Community Survey that the US Census Bureau collects. And in order to get a large enough sample size, we used 5-year estimates, and we took a look at the demographics. I'm just going to give you a few tantalizing highlights of the many maps that we prepared in our analysis. This first map just shows the distribution of the foreign-born population in Dallas by the census tracts. And you can see the darker the shade of purple, the larger the percent of the residents that are foreign-born. I'll pause for a second for you to just take a sense to see if any of you were surprised about this, but this is the current distribution up through 2018. We then took a look at language, and we're going to cut the question of language acquisition several ways in our data today. And this is, again, from the census data, the percent of the foreign-born that speak another language and they don't speak English well. And again, the darker the purple, the higher the concentration of individuals that do not speak English well. Finally, the asset mapping. We did a lot of asset mapping in our report. I'm just highlighting one because we've already identified job opportunities and economic development. as a priority for the city of Dallas. And this map, and again, I don't know in a visual like this video conference, not sure how much you can see from it, but if you go to our report, which is available free online, you will be able to see how, in this instance, it's workforce development centers and community colleges, the extent to which they're located in neighborhoods and of easy access to immigrant populations. And we did maps like this of a variety of important resources and assets in the city of Dallas. So that was our neighborhood, our socioeconomic analysis of the neighborhood. The third piece that we tackled was the immigrant perspective. What was life like to them? And this was our field research project. And we used a survey that had already been developed by Stanford University, which has an immigrant policy lab. So it was a tried and true survey instrument. And we went to Dallas, all of us spent the first weekend in March. We got there just before COVID and interviewed 160 foreign-born residents in the city of Dallas. We have lots of findings from that we discuss in our report, but I'm just going to zero in on three for this presentation. The first one is social integration. And this score, Dallas does not do well. It shows on the Stanford social integration score that most respondents in Dallas are socially isolated. However, in other questions we asked on the survey, we found that the respondents did not feel isolated. And so this paradox suggested to us that the immigrants did feel a strong sense of community in the neighborhood that they lived in, even if they might have been socially isolated on measures of immigrant integration. So that's an important thing to think about. The next one is linguistic. And again, I mentioned language is an important thing when you're talking about immigrant incorporation. And we found that more than a third of the sample population is not well integrated linguistically. Again, you'll recall from the map that I showed just a moment ago, there are major pockets of the city of Dallas where people don't know English very well. And this lack of linguistic integration can lead to more general problems in the incorporation of immigrants into the community. And finally, because it's a reoccurring theme in our analysis, are the economic challenges that the city of Dallas faces in terms of immigrant incorporation. Now, this is the good news and the bad news. The good news is on the standard measures of economic integration, immigrants in Dallas are very well integrated. They score quite well. That means they're employed and they're engaged in the economy. The bad news piece is that many of them are in low-wage jobs. So the incomes that residents of Dallas who are foreign-born, what they're earning is keeping them at or near poverty levels, or in the low-wage sectors, even though many of the people we interviewed had lived in Dallas for a long period of time. So finally, I'm going to take us to a few of the recommendations we have. I'm going to just zero in on the big three. And the first one is recognizing that Dallas has already accomplished a lot in the role of the city of Dallas in government engagement. We think it's very important not to rest on your laurels. You need to continue to exercise government leadership in immigrant incorporation, because that's going to be essential to achieving the next two recommendations. Promoting economic development and civic engagement among immigrants is a key way to move Dallas up in those earlier rankings I showed you, where Dallas was middling to low in comparison with other cities that are similar to Dallas and to other cities across the United States. So economic development is key, civic engagement is key, and we'll be happy to talk about that in the Q&A period. And finally, our third recommendation builds on the economic development and civic engagement by emphasizing the need to enhance educational outcomes, neighborhood livability, and access to health and human services in immigrant communities. One of the takeaways from this, if you think about what have we recommended, many of the things that we've recommended are things that, of course, help immigrant communities, but they're the kinds of programs and services and initiatives that help everyone living in the city of Dallas. And so with that, I am going to conclude this overview and turn to the next phase of the seminar.
Great, thank you so much for that overview. And I think right now what we'll do is go into some discussion questions that we've prepared so that we can dive a little deeper into this data that and report that you have all prepared. So one of the first things I wanted to explore a little bit more in depth was one of the fundamental steps in your research project was defining and understanding what immigrant adaptation in the US looks like and the process, and researching those theoretical frameworks. For me, actually, just today, I just had a conversation about the difference between assimilation and incorporation, integration. So I would like to hear a little bit more about the research that you did, the process, and how did you come to using the term of immigrant incorporation?
Great. Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. So obviously, defining what makes a welcoming city is complicated. One of the models we looked at by a researcher named Ensinger, I'm probably pronouncing that correctly, talks about the three domains that policy can kind of act in, being political, cultural, and socioeconomic. And often these different policies are happening at different levels of government, and they're uncoordinated. So it's there's a lot of moving parts in making city welcoming. But to speak to the reason we kind of emphasized incorporation over something like assimilation, is that assimilation has a history of being kind of a one-way street, if that makes sense. As in putting all of the effort on immigrants to change and adapt to the new culture that they live. So one of the models we looked at, Barry's model, kind of measures integration or how immigrants adapt based on different two different things. So one is cultural adaptation, and the other, which kind of is newer in its emphasis, is rooted the heritage and the culture that the immigrants have come from. So assimilation would be the immigrants adapted to American culture very well, but they maybe weren't able to maintain their own culture. And as we'll talk about later, maintenance of your own culture is particularly important in civic engagement. And there have been some really interesting research showing correlation between maintenance of your native language and rates of volunteering. So that's kind of a main overview. It kind of depends on the field, whether you use integration or incorporation. In political science, psychology, sociology, you could see variation. And then there's also variation between the American context and other countries. Like in Europe, it's more common to see integration. But especially in the American context, integration carries a lot of feelings and connotations related to racial integration. So I think that's one of the reasons that we've kind of moved toward incorporation instead of integration.
Great. I think your explanation of how this work needs to be a two-way street, I think that's a great segue into my next question, which in a lot of your research, you talk about how a key part of improving immigrant inclusivity is promoting civic participation. And in the report, you mentioned that you want to take a more diversified, we should be taking a more diversified approach towards promoting civic participation among immigrants. So what is some examples that you could describe of what a diversified approach might be? What city leaders might consider when it comes to promoting civic participation, especially among the immigrant community?
I can speak to this one, and feel free to jump in, colleagues. But I think when people think of civic participation, their mind automatically jumps to voting, which is obviously important. And naturalization, this gaining citizenship, is a huge part of legal protections and helping immigrants kind of feel a sense of belonging in the community. But like you said, there are other ways, other avenues for immigrants to be more civically engaged. And some of the things that the city can do to help people get more involved is helping create events that are friendly to non-citizens, like school councils or planning boards. And the huge barrier is obviously language. So having resources for people that is in their native language can be really helpful, and just making them feel safe at these kind of events and assuring them that they are welcome at them.
Great. My next question is, so I think one of the biggest areas for growth or for areas of opportunity for improvement for the city of Dallas is creating more livable wage workforce opportunities. So what are some important things that Dallas decision makers should consider when developing economic recovery programs, especially in light of COVID-19? You know, there's going to be a lot of revamping of workforce programs, economic recovery. So I guess I think I would be curious to hear what are some of the things that we should be considering as we move forward with this.
I would say certainly being conscious of who we're including and excluding in these programs. So who are the people that are eligible to apply, and keeping in mind, especially now, what we've seen during COVID is that a lot of our minority and women-owned businesses don't have the know-how to apply to some of these loan programs. So making sure that we have the forethought of including some sort of technical assistance in that.
I think we might be having some connectivity issues. Does anybody else want to jump in to help answer the question?
One of the things that in our report, and it's one of the reasons that I put the map up, is just having services accessible in the neighborhoods that are reachable. And this is always a challenge for workforce development and language acquisition, but making sure that they're accessible to people that may not have cars. And we have a whole section on transportation in the report that's worth taking a look at in terms of how you set up the kinds of workforce training issues. But there's no question that available workforce training, and as Claudia mentioned, having things that provide technical assistance is extremely important to immigrant populations who are poised and ready to go. They just don't know how to maneuver the system. And let's be honest, municipal bureaucracies are Byzantine, and they're a challenge for anyone. And if you're not a local, they're particularly a challenge.
I think this goes back to your point of, when we can promote prosperity for immigrants. You know, we're promoting prosperity for everyone. So I think that point about creating more access to really not just even location, but, you know, you also need to provide that support, the technical assistance. I think those are great points. I guess another question I had, you know, you guys did a three-tiered approach. You looked at quantitative data, and now I'm really curious, you guys also did qualitative studies, researching in terms of like going out in the field. So I thought that was so interesting, and I can't imagine how much work that must have been. From the perspective of local governments or any organization looking to collect data from immigrant communities, what are some of the things that we should be considering? I'm thinking particularly like protecting safety, confidentiality. These are things that I think, particularly in our climate right now, we have to always be taking into consideration. So I guess if I were an organization or a research institute, what are some of the things that I should be considering when it comes to collecting data and publishing data, especially of vulnerable populations like immigrants and refugees?
Yeah, so I can talk on this a little bit. So before we actually went out in the field, we did a lot of preparation. Several of my classmates and I, we have a background in social work. So the field research team and the class discussed a lot about how to phrase questions, how to present ourselves in the community, how to actually market that we were going to be there without having a chilling effect in the community. We wanted to be aware of the political climate that we're in, that we do hear a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, and we were very aware of that. So going into a community, it's important to keep that in mind, that that we don't want to cause fear. We don't want to cause mistrust. We don't want to go in and with an ivory tower approach, because these immigrants, these individuals, they are the experts on their own experience. We're not the experts on that. We don't know more than them. So we came in with that approach to the field research, and we were able to go into the community, and we were welcome. We felt a lot of positive connections with people, but we also did see mistrust. We did see caution from individuals because they didn't know who we were. They weren't used to just having outsiders come into their, into their own communities. So we would suggest to keep that in mind. In our survey, we didn't have any questions that asked for identifiable information. We didn't ask for names. We didn't keep addresses. And when in our reports, that's also very important. We didn't ask for anything that could be traced back to them. So people felt more open and honest and willing to share their experiences. And I think that's something that's very important for researchers to keep in mind. We don't know it all. That's why we're conducting research, and that's why we're going into these communities so they can tell us what we need to hear.
This is definitely a process that we're all learning together in. So I want to now turn it over to Chief Liz Cedillo Pereira. We've had a lot of great discussion about this study, about looking at this opportunity of growth that we have here in Dallas. And I'm curious, especially as somebody who's just positioned in this job, I'm really looking forward to asking these questions. Just give us an overview of how did the establishment of the Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs come about? What are the challenges that did you face? What accomplishments are you most proud of?
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for everyone for all your thoughtful comments and insights. I continue to learn about how we can do our work better at the city. And this is certainly a lesson learned for us. We know that we're a work in progress at the city of Dallas, and humble enough, I think, to be able to receive the study that has been conducted by Ruth Lawson's team and the research field workers with a lot of gratitude, actually, because it's one thing to set up an office and call yourself welcoming. It's another thing to actually live out the work to full accomplishment. And we are certainly a work in progress. So that's how we receive this as a pretty decent score overall, but so much more work to do in terms of those areas that have been focused on, which is livability, labor force participation, language access, civic engagement, and looking at this through a human-centered approach that Aaron covered really is to understand that our residents are the experts of their own lives, and we should follow their lead as to what is working for them as quality of life issues, and where we could be a facilitator of improving quality of life for all of our residents, and certainly immigrants are an important part of our demographic at the city. We started the city's initiatives with that in mind. How do we become a city that looks at all of its residents as being super important to the fabric of our community and where we are going as we see ourselves moving into the future? Our immigrant demographic has grown substantially, over the course of a few decades, and with it has become a vibrance as related to, like, as the necklace that you're wearing demonstrates, Christina, people's cultures, their artistic values and interests, as well as languages. 43%, more than 43% of our households now speak a language other than English, right, in their home. So it's capturing all that data and then facilitating a program that actually is set up to help our city understand these nuanced approaches to how do we reach our diverse communities. So that's how it started. It was a community-driven effort well over 10 years ago that was saying, we need to become a more immigrant-friendly community. We need to understand how our demographics are changing, why people may feel like they're unwelcome. And it was a group of Dallas leaders who at the time asked our city government, our mayor at the time, to establish an office like this. And we gained, I was a part of that actually. I was a leader in the Dallas community, and we gained some momentum, but it didn't actually come to fruition until several years later. Under Mayor Rawlings thought it was very important as things were shifting at the federal government level. How does Dallas be intentional about the work of really leveraging the assets that all of our residents bring to our city, and establish and help establish with the council and city manager's leadership this office, and then working with a large cohort of our community members, the Welcoming Communities Task Force, over 85 very engaged Dallas leaders, including immigrants and refugees, who helped guide our efforts to create Dallas's first ever strategic welcoming plan. And that has guided some of our work. And now this very substantial, almost 200-page report will help, as you said, move us into the second phase of our endeavors.
Great. How has the Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs operations pivoted since the pandemic?
Well, I think everybody's lives have pivoted, right? But at the city level, we certainly have pivoted in the moment of COVID-19 to, and more granularly at the Office of Welcoming Communities, to understand how do we not lose connections with our community. As it's been highlighted, we have a lot of work to do in civic engagement, and we've been working on it for over 3 years now, and that we did not want to backtrack, because we are a big city, 9th largest city. It's hard, and you saw from the maps that immigrants and refugees live all over the city, and so it's hard to make those human connections with people. And that's been one of our challenges. And so we have pivoted to try to move into a digital age where we are communicating in an improved way with all of our residents, but certainly through the Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs, in different languages, in different mediums. And now with you, working to establish a bi-directional communications approach to how do we use people of our community that speak languages, not only Spanish, but Burmese and Arabic and Swahili, Vietnamese and Chinese. How do we use cultural brokers, if you will, to help us not only communicate the information that we want our residents to receive, but to receive information that we need to receive to be more dynamic and nimble and responsive to the changing times.
It's really, truly an honor to be part of this work, especially in this time where you know there's so much need out there. I think there's definitely a lot of work that we can do together. So I guess my last question for you, Chief Liz, is what services and resources does the Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs provide, particularly during the pandemic?
One of the leverage points that we bring, or one of the assets, if you will, that I think we bring to the city is has been pointed out by Professor Wasem, government leadership, right? You heard me speak about the city manager and the mayor, and our current mayor just during city council today talked about Welcoming Week and read a proclamation about this week being Welcoming Week and recognizing our diverse community members. So that's a really important part of the work, right? I don't want to discount that one bit, because it's, you know, as they say, leadership starts with the leadership, and then it's our responsibility to carry on the mission and the efforts to find the resources that we need. So Open Society Foundation, of course, is very aware nationally of the different welcoming offices. So we're one of a couple of dozen, right, of municipalities that have intentional offices set up to do this type of inclusion and integration work, and identified us as, because of our community, because of our strong philanthropic makeup, and because of the need, identified us as one of the cities that they wanted to grant cash in hand assistance specifically to people who did not qualify for the stimulus check program of the federal government. And so we received $500,000. The city received $500,000, and that pot of money has grown. Now we have a pot of $600,000, and hopefully it will continue to grow. And working with the Communities Foundation of Texas, able to provide resources, cash in hand assistance to Dallas residents, immigrants who were left out of that federal aid program in this moment of COVID. And it's going to be dispersed through partners who are very attuned to what immigrants and refugees are facing in this moment. Linguistically, economically, socially, et cetera. And so the nonprofits that have been selected will be throughout the whole city, because as Dr. Wasem has pointed out, we need to have services available and accessible in the neighborhoods where our residents live. And so we hope that's just the beginning of this very intentional effort to not only provide sort of a social safety net at this moment with a bit of cash in hand assistance, but then to also layer that on with additional resources and an understanding of what resources are needed and how do we leverage the staying power and the resilience that our diverse communities bring to this game so that we can augment what's already occurring in their lives.
I have to say, I think under your leadership, Chief Liz, like we've been able to really come together and collaborate with organizations to help address some of the disparities that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. But this is a question to all the panelists. What are the ways you think that we as a city can address the systemic injustices that immigrants and refugees face today?
Yeah, I can talk to that a bit. But before, it would be remiss of me to not mention that I'm so excited to be here on 16 de Septiembre, when the Mexican Independence Day is celebrated during Welcoming Week. It's such a, important event to be happening, and it's such a timely event for things that are going on today. But like you said, when considering social issues like this, it's important to remember that when addressing issues such as immigration and the inequities and the injustices that immigrants and refugees face today, that these efforts cannot be siloed. There is such an overlap between immigration and education and affordable housing and and homelessness and healthcare and so on. So equity for immigrants and refugees cannot be fully addressed until other areas of inequality are addressed in the community as well. So like Dr. Wasem previously mentioned, that this work, it raises the entire community. When addressing systemic issues that help immigrants, it'll help the rest of the community as well. And I think that's something very important to remember, that these issues aren't individual and they cannot be siloed. There's such an overlap, and there's so much overlap, and just bringing in the different voices will help solve those issues.
Great. Does anybody else want to answer? What are some ways that we as a city can address the systemic injustices that immigrants and refugees face today?
I think, going along with what Aaron shared, and I think part of what we answered in the education question is really just the investment. We need the investment, and like Aaron said, it's not just for the immigrant community, but all marginalized communities. They need the investment in affordable housing and education. And I know right now, part of what people in Dallas are calling for is defunding the police and reinvesting some of that money into community resources and programs. And I sincerely think that that is part of what needs to be done.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a question from our audience. We have here on our WCIA database, auntbertha.com, which is actually an online database with local resources that are available on a variety of different types of categories. Are there particular resources you can recommend for refugee and immigrant families who have lost their primary breadwinners due to COVID-19? I have received requests for assistance in these situations. Chief Liz, do you want to share a little bit about our Aunt Bertha platform, or as we call it locally here, our Community Resources Hub, and share some background about that, how people can use that, as particularly during COVID-19 response?
So just hearkening back to the idea that we're very receptive to what our community members have to say about the work we're doing and how we're going about doing it. And what we heard from the very beginning was that people needed access to resources that was reliable and in different languages. And they didn't always need somebody putting out a directory, but they wanted to be able to access the services themselves. And so we partnered up with a company called Aunt Bertha. It's not Tia Bertha or a person, it's an actual digital platform and based out of Austin, Texas. And what they do for us is be able to curate information that we hear from our community members is important to access. As the person who's asking the question or raising the issue has stated, it's there. You can find anything from housing, rental assistance, to immigration, legal services, to childcare, to just a vast array of community resources that we have heard are important to members of our community, and we continue to refine it and to improve it and to make it accessible. And when we came to Aunt Bertha to help us do this, they were really involved or very steeped in the healthcare industry. So they have a lot of data on health resources. And so that's there as well. But we wanted to tailor it to the unique needs of people who didn't actually, who may have come to the country a few years ago or have been here a couple of decades, but were not from the country. So we have curated to the extent that we need to, we think, based on what immigrant and refugees have told us are important. And it's available in over 100 languages. And you can find it on the WCIA, Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs webpage. and share it out. It's a free resource that we set up for our community. Thank you for that question.
This is definitely, I think, a living database. So it's something that's updated continuously. I meet regularly with our Aunt Bertha technical assistance team. So it's definitely something that is not stagnant, which I love, that we can adapt it and use it to whatever our community needs. I guess one question for all the panelists is, what was something that surprised you, or what's something that you learned in this process of conducting the study, and what was something that I guess that you would never have thought of, or that you, I guess, surprised you in this process? And so I'm curious to hear what did you learn in this process?
So one of the things that really surprised me was the disconnect between some of the scores that we saw the city of Dallas had in the NAE index. So Dallas scored really well in their government policies that are welcoming to immigrant incorporation. However, they scored lower in the livability, civic engagement that we've mentioned. And it surprised me initially, but then as we continued to look at the data, we saw that in a lot of large cities simply because there are more inequities.
Oh man, I'm so sad that Claudia has great points, and we keep on having issues with the internet. How about let's go to another research associate who might be able to jump in and share. What are some of the things that surprised you in this process?
Go ahead, Anna.
Okay. I personally did a lot of the analysis of the transportation, and I was surprised that more immigrants weren't using public transit. And I was really interested in why that is. Obviously, Texas has a huge car culture, but it was a little surprising for me. So I think the main mode of transportation is driving alone for everyone, although immigrants were more likely to carpool than their native counterparts. But yeah, I was really surprised about public transit and interested in how Dallas can improve public transit for everyone.
I think we got Claudia back, so I want to give her an opportunity to share. She was, I just want to make sure that she's able to finish her point, because I think it was really interesting what she was saying in comparing how our scores were comparing to other bigger cities.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my internet decided to bomb during this presentation, but basically that, Dallas is moving in the right direction as far as policy goes, but the actual implementation and what we're seeing on the ground isn't there yet. And there are cities like Chicago and Newark that are also big cities that have been doing this work for longer, and have already seen kind of that they're closing that gap between what policies they're putting forward and livability and civic engagement standards rising to that.
So we just started our process in becoming a welcoming city. So you're saying there's hope. This work takes a long time, but there's already been promise that's been demonstrated in other cities. I love that. Erin, you want to share a little bit about what surprised you in this process?
Yeah, so I did a lot of the demographic analysis and mapping. So I was surprised by how stark that division, or that almost segregation, is with how people who are immigrant born or foreign born are really separated into different pockets of Dallas, and how it's generally in low income areas. And I think that's just on my mind with a lot of equity and race issues that we're talking about today, and that's just so interesting to see how planning and city development really just exasperates that divisiveness in communities. And I think, as like Claudia was saying, that this work, as it continues, there is that hope, and to bring the services into communities so that these gaps can definitely close. But yeah, just that starkness in how divisive the maps of the immigrant population was in Dallas was very surprising to me.
It makes your research study just so much more critical by demonstrating that. And Dr. Wasem, I'd love to hear your perspective on what it was that surprised you, especially as an expert who's been doing this work for quite some time. I'm curious to see if you were surprised, maybe you weren't surprised, and so I'm curious to hear what you think.
Thank you, and I get surprised every day because there is so much we don't know. And for me, as a newcomer to Texas, I've only been here 4 years, and I'd only been to Dallas a few times. I was just, I'm not saying I was surprised to be welcomed, but I was certainly gratified with this opportunity to get to know Dallas better and to be welcomed in the immigrant community, but welcomed citywide. There were a few things that I'm curious about. So it left me with more questions. And one of the questions I want to pick up on something Aaron said about the neighborhoods and the segregation. And it's a question of, when immigrants become successful, those that do they stay in Dallas, or do they move to the surrounding areas? Is Dallas losing? When are there places for prosperous immigrants in Dallas? Because when we took a look at this, I know that there are many immigrants who do quite well. We know that. But are they staying in Dallas as their? So that's not a surprise as much as a curiosity, that I'm left with. There's many more questions that we have.
That's definitely an interesting question. I know for a city to be successful, it needs to be growing, and also we want to make sure that folks feel welcomed and are able to stay in our city. So yeah, and Chief Liz, I'm curious, was there anything in this process that surprised you or that you learned that you would like to share with us?
I certainly have learned. I've learned a great deal, and that's sort of why I jumped at the opportunity and raised my hand when Professor Wasem presented the challenge to us. I have a cohort of LBJ students, and they're going to be with me for a semester. And what do you think about, under my tutelage, having them study your city and giving you feedback on what your efforts are to date? And of course, we couldn't. We probably don't have it within our budget to pay what it would have cost to conduct this sort of analyses and serious study, quantitative and qualitative, as you noted, and they just made it, in time for to evade COVID-19 and have to undergo social distancing, et cetera. So, things were in alignment for us to be able to avail ourselves of this challenge and this opportunity. So I knew that, so I'm not surprised by we going into this cities, some challenges facing us ahead of how do we become a more inclusive economy? How do we overcome the vestiges of systemic racism? And how do we move toward rather than apart from each other? And immigrants in our town tend to be communities of color. So that was not a surprise to me, but it was a surprise to me, that the work ahead of us is not daunting, because I think that if we're intentional and we are creative, and we can move have done in terms of government leadership. We can accelerate efforts if there's that intentionality behind it in all of us, working together. So the disparities and the call outs did not surprise me. We're a city, we're and like a lot of cities, right? We have a big demography, we have big geographic makeup in Dallas, which creates some challenges for us. And we also are welcome in another sense. We have been one of the highest rates of refugee resettlement in the nation for many years, up until most recent national policy shifts. So I know that we're welcoming in that regard of receiving, being sort of a flagship for people from all over the world to come to our communities. And so it's that we view that we had that sort of that, if you will, the organic makeup of great community members. Our challenge is the city becoming relevant in that space as well. How do we shift policies so that, as Ruth has pointed out, people can stay and want to stay in our city as they continue on their life journey, right? That we have the opportunity and raise their kids and build up and help build our economy even further. So a lot of work ahead of us, and really just a lot of gratitude for the work that's been done thus far.
Yes, definitely. We definitely have a lot of work ahead of us. And I guess to that point, what would you, this is a question for all the panelists, what would you like to see if we were to do this study again 10 years from now? Or, if we were to looking back, of course, this is where we are at this point, looking to the future, 10 years from now, what would you like to see in terms of your vision of inclusion for Dallas and the state for overall? I'd be curious to hear what you all would hope to see.
I can jump in here. Well, as a Dallas native, I honestly would hope that, first of all the NAE scores are out of 5. And truly that the practices of immigrant integration are so much a part of business as usual at City Hall that there's not even a need for this office. Like that is such an ingrained part of what the city does as a function that there doesn't have to be a special office to do the work. Everybody does it. Yeah, that's my vision.
That's great. Does anybody else want to share? I think we have a little bit of time to have everyone share.
Well, I'll jump in with just a few things, and that's there is, this does provide you with data that are benchmarks. So it's one of the things going forward is to think about what data, what do you want to continue so that you can regularly check in to take your temperature. How are we doing? So it's good to have empirical evidence on which to assess how your policies are going. So that, as having that part of your work, I'm glad we were able to provide that for you. And I'd like to just see for me, it's mostly improved civic engagement is what I'd like to see, and the job opportunity, economic development. Those are the two. Obviously, I emphasized them in the presentation, but I think that when more people are engaged, when economic opportunities and wages grow, everyone thrives. The whole city is popping and hopping and doing great. And I think that will be happening. I am very confident about Dallas's future.
That's great. Anna, do you want to share?
Yeah, I guess just to add to what Dr. Wasem and Claudia have already said, I would definitely things, but I would hope that these efforts to kind of include all of the members of the community, immigrants, but also lower income Native people as well. I would hope that that would strengthen communities, and if we have really strong immigrant neighborhoods, I would love them to be vibrant. And Aaron and I, we read a work by a Dallas native, Sandoval Strauss book, Barrio America, and kind of the picture that in my mind of what Oak Cliff used to be. I would love to see that in all of the immigrant neighborhoods, and yeah, just more appreciation, more welcoming weeks, more cultural events, where we can all come together and appreciate everything that all of the different community members bring to the city.
Thank you. Aaron, do you want to share?
Yeah, and I think as a native born Texas, but I'm from El Paso, so from the other side, I would like to just think that and hope for in 10 years that we don't need to have these types of researches and studies anymore because it's so common, because every city is in fact welcoming, and that the big cities have, such as Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, are leading that. And I would like to see that spread throughout Texas and be able to have just welcoming communities set up throughout the state, and just include, like Anna said, those individuals who are poor or are in poverty or who are homeless, who are disabled, in the discussions also, to be able to continue this work and to be able to continue helping Texas become more integrated and bringing it back to the beginning, instead of placing the emphasis on a American culture that a community or a city has to aspire to. We put the emphasis on individual cultures that people bring to our cities. And I think seeing that and really incorporating that into the culture of Texas would be just be fantastic overall.
Chief Liz, do you want to share what your vision is for your work, this work that you really helped start 10 years from now?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for being with us. And as we say at the Office of Equity and Inclusion is everyone's work. And so I think that in 10 years, as some of the voices have already expressed, that this will be everybody's work, and we'll all be engaged, and we will all be helping our communities flourish, and economically, socially, culturally, and linguistically. So I guess the elephant in the room is whether or not Congress is ever going to give us some comprehensive immigration reform that will help people to really leap forward in where they are in their current space, right? Because I am myself sort of amazed of the resilience of the people that I come into encounters with on a daily basis, despite so many challenges that are before them, and still thrive, and not only survive but thrive. And I believe that when we have comprehensive immigration reform, many members of our community will be able to help us, catapult our efforts.
That's great.
This comprehensive immigration reform would have made its way to fruition. And
definitely, I think we're all hoping for that. Well, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists. I believe this is how we create home together. We have these conversations, we look at data, we discuss possible solutions, and I think we act. So I think I want to thank again all the panelists for their time, their dedication, effort, and passion that they've brought to this research. You've definitely helped the city of Dallas shine a light on how we can move forward in helping our city become more welcoming. So again, thank you everyone who participated, asking questions, watched online. We will be posting this and sharing this on our City of Dallas platforms, so you'll be able to refer back to it. And I guess hope you all have a good rest of the welcoming week. Thank you.
Thank you, LBJ.
Bye-bye. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.